Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Redefining Digital Investigations, a collaborative approach to mobile device forensics. I'm Savannah Zimmer, your moderator today, and the Director of Marketing at Purpose Legal. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're delving into the complex world of digital investigations, a realm where collaboration isn't just beneficial, it's essential. We've brought together a sterling panel of experts from across the fields of technology, law, and forensics to explore how unified efforts are transforming the landscape of mobile device data examination and its implications in legal contexts. Before we jump in, I want to meet all of our distinguished panelists. First, we have Alex, the Principal of Strategic Solutions at Reveal. Alex, would you please give a brief overview of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Savannah. Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. Alex Chatzistamatis. I've been in the technology space for about 20 years now. Started my journey in sort of the generalized information technology and security. Spent a good chunk of that time with the Philadelphia Police Department. That is where I sort of got bitten by the forensic investigation bug. And then ultimately spent 10 years with Nuix. Was Chief Technology Officer at a legal hold preservation and collection company that was ultimately acquired by Reveal, and have been with Reveal for almost the last year. And so happy to be here today to lend my expertise to the group.
Thank you. Next is Rick, the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Cloud9. Rick, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here. And so my quick history, I've been in the industry for over 20 years. 15 plus has been on the technology side. So I've focused a lot of my energies in building innovative technologies to handle, big challenges. Recently, maybe 5-6 years ago, started ESI Analyst that was acquired by Cloud9. That was to solve the problem of modern data challenges with typically we're talking about communications, but it can also be social media, geolocation, all of that. So my focus has been there. Also co-founder of the Masters Conference. So I see a lot of y'all out there at the various conferences. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Joining us as well is our own Steve Davis, the VP of Forensics and Investigations here at Purpose Legal. Steve, please say hello and tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I always love playing the game with a number of years because I always win that. I stopped counting after 30 years. So I just say 30 plus years of doing this. So I've been involved kind of like, and by the way, it's good to be with friends and colleagues, know these characters. All of them are very, not only admirable, but very schooled in what they do. So it was kind of fun when I heard we were going to do the conversation. My background really came from investigation. So the last 17 years, kind of like Alex, I've been involved with the forensic space. But prior to that, I worked with a government organization, quasi-governmental organization called the Resolution Trust Corporation, closing down S&Ls and securities companies in the late 80s and early 90s. So from that segued into forensics in the last 16, 17 years have been really exclusively trying to figure out how to get data off of physical devices and the various repository data sources we run into.
Nice, thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Matt, the founder and CEO of Mode One. Matt, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Matt Rasmussen, founder of Mode One here. I've been in the space for 22 years. I've been both on the litigation service provider side as well as running the litigation technology group for some of the largest law firms here in the country. So was kind of a process improvement litigation technology project management background. Obviously got a lot of exposure to forensics on the litigation service provider side, and had a custodian almost swing on me when I was trying to collect a cell phone. So I started my own company to try and make that easier, and super excited to dive in with this group of experts here and kind of unpack some of these pain points.
Thank you, gentlemen, for those introductions. Before we jump into today's discussion, I just want to do a quick note to the audience. We encourage you to ask questions as they come to mind. You can submit them through the chat feature. We'll either address those in real time, or if time is tight, our experts will follow up directly post-webinar. Without further ado, let's begin. My first question, with the continuous expansion in data volumes and the increasing diversity of data types, and the heightened pace of data generation. Do investigators require a multifunctional solution? I know I heard the word Swiss Army knife a lot in our planning sessions. Rick, can you kick this one off for us?
Absolutely. It's actually funny timing wise. Had a conversation with a client yesterday, and she was just talking about how for this particular case, she just wants that one solution to manage it all. And she's like, I've tried, it's not going to happen, right? Because this involves cell phones, social media, email accounts, really the whole gamut, right? So for her, putting together a really technology suite to handle the challenges has been really important. And so coming to that with the the understanding that data can't go through a linear document review workflow for everything, we came to some really good conclusions that you can leverage a few technologies and even a few companies to solve the problem as a whole.
Anyone else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can add on to that. I mean, if you just look at over time, right? Like when we started, go 20 years ago, discovery was paper and we were copying it or we were scanning it, right? And that was it. And then e-discovery came around and we were doing email was the big thing and maybe some e-docs. And then we got into laptops. Well, I mean, fast forward today, like O'Malveny started an autonomous driving practice group, right? Like there are VR headsets now. There's software suites to handle very niche parts of your business, right? And so to think that to Rick's point, to think that there's a one tool fits all kind of methodology is just not appropriate, right? And for any of the forensic examiners that are on the call here, how many times have you guys been in the field and another tool's failing, right? And like you're with the client, right? So you can't just show up with the one solution that you think was going to happen. You really do need to be able to roll with the punches and be able to accommodate what those types of variables that do come your way. So I think it is important to really show up prepared with that, proverbial Swiss Army knife there.
Yeah, and I've always thought of it of when you approach the problem, do you need the sledgehammer? Do you need the tweezer? We talk about the different toolkits that are out there. Matt's point on, I'm going to make him feel really good, and he's going to owe me lunch or dinner or a drink, which is we tried to do a collection 3 days in a row this week using another famous product out in the marketplace for mobile device collections, and just got hung up and failed because what you understand, and Alex and I both know this, that as much as you think forensics is a science, it's really an art also. And so it's you got to be flexible doing it. But we utilize the Mode 1 technology to do a remote collection, and literally the client and the custodian said, why didn't we do this first? So, funny comment, but the reality is sometimes that's the greatest product and greatest solution in the world, much like the other ones like Reveal and ESIA are with Cloud9. Sometimes those are the right solutions. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes you need to think about using a different one. I just think having that open mind, like Matt said, when you're approaching a problem, don't pre-assume you know the answer, but come at it from, like we do as kind of scientists, come at it from an empirical standpoint and an open-minded standpoint of what might work, and you'll be surprised sometimes.
Yeah, and I would like to add too to that, and I agree with everyone. I think also the sophistication level of the technology in place, like, you've got some folks who join an organization and they're sort of stuck with these tools that maybe were acquired 5, 10, 15 years ago. And depending on budget cycles and whatnot, maybe they have to live with that. I think in those types of situations too, it comes with the experience, right, of the team that you have. Maybe they're stuck with these tools. Maybe they find a way to make it work, right? They can script and do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, again, when you get into these situations, having the right tool for the right job, of course, is appropriate. And I think, being in the space for such a long time, seeing some things come and go, there is no, one-stop shop, right? There's tools out there that, have all of these different components, but it really is being pragmatic, understanding what are the business needs for the organization, what type of data sources do we have challenges with, and that could require different tools to get the job done.
Thank you. I actually hear that conversation a lot, so I think that's really helpful. And Matt, I'll be sending you a bill for that advertising.
Sounds
That's
good.
that's going directly to me. What do you mean sending a bill?
That's right.
We'll handle that offline.
Okay, perfect. Throughput has always been a topic of discussion in digital investigations. How has its importance evolved over the years? Matt, you want to kick this one off for us?
Oh, sure. I mean, kind of just opining on what I was saying earlier, where we went from paper to what we are today. Just the sheer volume of what's going on in the world is immense. I think Doug Austin has the updated what's happening in an internet minute in 2023 or 2022, one of the two. I encourage everyone to just go Google it. I mean, millions of texts, hundreds of thousands of tweets. I mean, all the amount of data proliferation here is just immense. And so being able to move through that quickly, I think that comes in two ways, right? It's better scoping on what we're looking for, not grabbing everything, right? And then being able to use the technologies that are available today to streamline those things, cloud-based technologies, cloud resourcing, integrations into tools, right? I call it data hopping, but if I send out a kit to collect a phone, right, I'm copying that data from a phone to a kit, and that kit's shipping back to my lab, and I'm taking it from that laptop to my lab machine, and I take it from a lab machine to whatever, and then it's going to the client, right? And there's all these things, and that's friction, right? And so, especially if you're collecting an entire phone or you grab the entire email server, I mean, those things are going to be slow. So for us to be able to kind of handle today's business, right? And I mean, just corporate business, cloud scaling, making sure that things are very efficient there. I think that's super, super valuable for us today.
Yeah, I like to think of it as the dirty little secret of e-discovery, the All-American Reject song about dirty little secrets, because dirty little secret of e-discovery is that there's these gnomes that pour all the data into a funnel. And so I went from a 20 megabyte computer was my first computer, and now all my kids have got 3 and 4 terabytes, drives on their desk to house the data. And the dirty little secret is there's salespeople out there that would love to get their grubby little paws on those drives and on that data, and then get compensated on a gigabyte basis for it. So this is where you need to be thoughtful. This is where you need to have experts that weigh in, that divide the wheat from the chaff, and actually get down to the granularity of what is really important. Like lawyers used to call and say, hey, I've got 5 gigs on this data. And I'm like, do you? I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. But I think we need to assess and do a little backdrop and look at the problem, figure out how long is it going to take us to get there, figure out where you're going first, and then come up with a program, a workflow, decide upon the tools that are necessary, and get down to what really matters, and get away from the data grab and this notion of Horton Hatches the data by sitting on all this data and holding it. And the longer you do, the more annuitized you get by getting monthly stipends for what you house in your repository. So I think it's being more thoughtful and not just assuming everything's black and white, but rather knowing that the landscape is very gray, and we're going to get into this later when we talk, but all the disparate types of data types that are out there now introduces a lot of challenges as well.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rick.
Go ahead, Alex. No, absolutely. You win.
I was just going to say, to Steve's point there, part of it too really is understanding, and I sort of mentioned this on the previous question, but it's really understanding your business, right? Understanding what the trends look like. How often do these types of investigations actually occur internally? You don't necessarily want to buy, a Ferrari tool, that's got all these bells and whistles, which look on face value might be great, but if you're only using those things once or twice a year, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And so I think it's, that's definitely a big part of it, but also the proactive nature, right? You don't always want to react to these kinds of things. So investing in a cost-effective technology that allows you to meet the your demand today, but ultimately where things are going to go in the future. And again, that's kind of where that speed and scale comes in. But as Steve mentioned, the data type certainly is a big part of that, and we'll chat about that here in a moment.
I'll take a perspective of being on the technology side for as long as I have. You have to look at tech that has as much care for all the pretty pictures and cool things you do in the middle, but getting data in and getting data out is just as important, and the speed to that. We know in our fast-paced legal world, It's well, it's as we're doing this on like it's like a Friday, right? So 3 o'clock comes around, that's when we get all the calls. So we need all this data in there so we can review by Monday, right? No, but really it's especially with all of the new data types, it is important to make sure that you're not having to process every single thing into documents or something first. There's better ways to approach that. So look at the tech out there that is paying attention to getting data in and getting data out as important as the middle part. But when we look at the middle part of all of this, that also is important for modern data to look at things like, for instance, the value proposition I've been bringing to the table for the past 6-7 years now is let's look at all this data differently. When we're looking at the investigation or the big review of this data, do we just need documents and go through a doc review process? I don't think so. People start conversations in email, switch over to Slack, then they'll pick up their phones, use WhatsApp. If those are all individual documents, you're going to miss a lot of the context there. So again, yes, getting data in is important, getting data out, but the middle part for modern data, I think that there's some new ways to approach the challenges there.
You guys touched on a couple of topics that actually segue fantastically into the next question, which is what various data types can now be incorporated into digital investigations, and how has technology facilitated this integration? Alex, can you start us off on this one?
Yeah, I would ultimately say that if we kind of, even as I got into this space formally about 10, 12 years ago, I think one of the kind of big things that I've sort of seen evolve in that time is really not only the data volume and the data variety, which of course Rick just kind of touched on, but then ultimately, this sort of advent of AI, right? And being able to really help apply that. Obviously a big loaded term, and we could probably go down a rabbit hole there. But the way in which I think to kind of use those things to classify documents is, again, kind of going back to the prior question about how Rick sort of mentioned and alluded to being able to do that sort of at scale and being able to group things and kind of use them for these individual things. Had some really great successes that I've seen, personally firsthand with organizations that, even in its basic form of taking documents and classifying them and sort of better understanding as you start this investigation, hey, what do I got here? What can I wrap my arms around? How does, this 10% of documents actually pertain to this particular investigation that I'm doing? And so, just really being able to see the advent of how that has come and, the 10, 12 years I've been in the space, and how customers can really benefit from these advancements in all sorts of different technology, from cloud computing to, AI and analytics. It's really awesome to kind of see the benefits of that.
Yeah, I think of the movie Usual Suspects, and the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist, Kaiser Sose.
Right.
With our business, it's really the GUIs and the mobile user interfaces that kind of trick us. So we look at things on our screen, and lawyers are way smarter than I am, but they look at it and they assume that the things that appear on mobile devices, the things that appear in Slack, the type of connectivity we have with modern attachments that are really pointers to URLs or embedded documents in a repository, to them on the screen, they look at them and they think, hey, it is what it is, right? There's a document in front of me. Well, we all know from our various backgrounds that getting to that data and getting it captured and then exported out of whatever platform, repository, or device it's contained within, the residency of it, is a horse of a different color. It's different to go ahead and get access to that information and then put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So we call it parsing or normalization of data when we do it within the confines of forensics. But I think that's a huge issue with, the fast forward to give me the documents and let me look at them. It's like, you don't understand. We've got to get our hands on those documents. Sometimes we have to put pieces together from various partitions and devices and databases, and then really reconstitute them in a format that allows practitioners to look at them.
Well, the other thing that we're not talking about just yet is, we hear this in the industry all the time, but it's specifically with like smartphones and stuff, is data not documents, right? So like attachments and the contract you sent, those things are all valuable. The text message you sent, also very valuable. But like I have a colleague who pulled location data off of 2 different cell phones, mapped it, and showed that 2 different people from 2, kind of opposing companies met together at the same coffee shop for 2.5 hours on a Friday, right? Like that's, to Steve's point, that's not on the face of the text message. That doesn't say that Rick and Alex got together at Pete's. You know what I mean? There's that kind of stuff too, where these things are, I mean, the phones are logging things, we're auditing things. Like there's all these things being tracked, and not in a malicious way. It's just that data is available now, and we can utilize that to better the business, get through the investigation faster, be smarter about it, those types of things. So something else to kind of be considerate about is you're not just looking for that PDF file or that text thread. There could be other components on the phone that you're also interested in.
Yeah, the data in that documents is a bit of a mantra for me, because when we so early on we had this case, and it was wild. It was basically multi-level marketing employees going from one company to the next. So 15 of them, it's no big deal, right? We'll just get their emails and documents and be fine. No, the way they're doing their business was on social media: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. It was all of them, right? So each custodian had 15 collections to 20 collections that included certainly email and laptops and all that, but then having to put that all together. If we went down the document review path, we would have lost. In fact, that's why they came to us, because we stitched that all together to show the communications among each other that would transfer from Twitter direct message to Facebook Messenger to a text message to WhatsApp. All of that needed to be tracked and put together. So all of the data out there is not just emails and documents, right? Certainly those will always be important and they're never going away, but all of this other data is coming in. Matt, you know very well, all the data that's found on just the device. A phone alone can have some really good context. So geolocation, websites visited, those types of things can now be really important for these investigations and even in general litigation.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to that, and Steve will appreciate this from the sort of investigative background here, but the concept of pull means more now than ever before, right? People, objects, locations, and events, being able to sort of triangulate all of those things and kind of get to the meat and get to the answers as quickly as possible is definitely more important than ever.
Yeah, I think the words I always use and overuse are residency and redundancy. So where do things live, but then where also do they get backed up? We had a huge case where the guy was like, we're collecting phones from 300 people, and one of them called up and said, hey, straight up my bad, it fell in the pool last night. Of course it did. And so I was like, okay, well, no worries, send it in. We'll pop it in the bowl of rice and try that trick. But knowing full well that maybe the data existed somewhere else, and after doing a little probing and asking questions, not only the residency of data and whether data exists on the physical device or whether it's synced and backed up to a secondary location, but also like where else can you get it? Are there cloud backups? Like think about for an iOS device, you have both synced data and you have iPhone backups that may exist in iCloud. So for someone who's a bad character and goes in the day before, they throw it in the pool, or they delete messages between someone they shouldn't be communicating with, that data may still exist in some other static form in another location. So you just need to think through and ask up front the questions versus just reacting.
So on top of that, Steve, you and I worked on a case where all that happened, phone is deleted, right? No text messages, sorry, gone forever. There was no iPads, there was no backups anywhere. So what did we do? Well, who did you talk to about such and such a thing? So we went out and collected over 100 devices to restructure those threads if it came from that original person's phone. So there are many ways to find this data that's out there. Anyway, it was a fun one. So
yeah.
The audience has learned that you can't just throw your phone in a pool and get away.
No, you can't.
Process.
The blender or nothing.
Nope.
Good to know. I can save my my phone and dip in the pool. How do synergies between technology, law, and forensics enhance the outcome of a digital investigation? Steve, can you take this one for us?
Yeah, that's pretty overarching. It's everything under the sun, right? So I think what that question begs is collaboration. I think that when you think about, we always make the joke when you have like the law on your side, argue law. And if you have the facts on your side, argue facts. And if you have nothing on your side, just argue. Well, that's changed now into argue about process and argue about technology and what people are utilizing. I mean, I get tired of testifying, and I've done it many times, primarily because people are trying to tear down whatever precepts, foundational things you've done. And so I think to me, and the cases I love are where you have collaboration, both between the legal groups as well as the vendors that are employed and the technologies you use. It is what it is. I love that phrase. I mean, facts are facts, and the data and the documents will tell you the story. So I think you've got to have a collaboration. You've got to involve stakeholders. You got to involve the people that know where the bodies are buried. You need to involve the custodial people that have access or information that's probative value to the case. And then you have to have scientists or forensic people or people that are schooled in e-discovery that can help take that mountain of data and make it into a molehill.
And on that, though, what you're saying might sound also like a mountain in and of itself, but I will say processes and technology has made a lot of this easier to collect the data, to get the data into a review platform. There's a lot of really good people and technology out there to simplify that process. I think all parties in this call would tell you the same thing, and also are facilitators of those easy processes.
Yeah, and something I'm running into all the time that's really where I'm wanting to see the most synergies is like specifically on the corporate side, right? Like legal ops or the OGC, they're the ones handling legal hold and saying I need Rick's phone and those types of things, but it's not a legal ops person who's doing any of the work, right? That's their InfoSec team or their internal IT team, or it's some other technical team. And so a lot of times when I'm discussing like, hey, what do you need from a phone, right? Do you need a couple texts and some photos, or do you need the whole image? So many people will tell me, oh, well, I need to do a full backup of the phone. And as soon as I kind of push in there, like, okay, I understand you from the technical side need to collect the whole phone because that's what you're being told. But that's that collaboration and that communication piece that's so important, because from the legal ops side, as soon as I ask them what they want, they say as little as possible, right? Like, I don't want to be grabbing their podcasts and their photos. I just need the text with their manager. And sometimes that gets lost in translation, right? So I think that's one of the things that's so important on those communication synergies, and just making sure that people are working well together is just to kind of save, those types of miscommunication mishaps.
And it's interesting, right? We're coming full circle to Matt's point. 10, 15 years ago, we saw the same thing with endpoints, right? Laptops and desktops and servers. And so, the trend continues now that the way to collect data from phones, especially, right, is now easier more than ever, especially with technologies like Mode 1. And I would add to that too, from Matt's perspective on corporations, which I tend to work with a lot these days, is it always kind of shocks me how the management of evidence is also an afterthought, right? And so this kind of goes back to Steve as well, even from an e-discovery or legal ops, where that might not necessarily be top of mind to people, whether you're doing this internally, whether you're working with, multiple tools, external, service providers or law firms, whatever the case might be, that I tend to see there's not really a great job at tracking that, right? How are you managing? Where is this data going, right? How are you handing it off, And so being able to sort of securing that supply chain, if you will, and managing it more effectively, having tools in place to sort of, give you visibility to know like, yep, okay, I'm handing this data off to, X, Y, and Z. Again, I think a very critical aspect to that, the combination of the people, process, and technology.
I think we've got the perfect group for this next question. So I'm going to touch on software here for a minute. So given the multitude of software options available, How does one navigate the decision-making process, and at what point do you think it is the most beneficial to consult an expert? Matt, I think you're a great person to kick this one off.
Sure. So, okay. So I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. So I'm a big proponent of the forensic Swiss Army knife, or the e-discovery Swiss Army knife, right? So like, I think that's the technology part, but as you're in a case and you need to figure out what's the right tool, I mean, it's understanding what the limitations are for a tool and those types of things, right? So like, I don't do full file system extractions from phones, right? That's a limiter of mode 1, right? And so through our POCs or when we're talking to clients, I'm very clear about like, hey, it's your guys' job to know where this tool can flex, what it can do, those types of things. But that's just as important for knowing what it can't do. And where it can't do a certain thing, you need to know what's the next tool to triage that, right? And that applies to everything, not just smartphones, right? It could be your processing software, it could be anything, right? So what AI stack you guys used, or we talked about this earlier, right? There may be a document review repository that may have certain features or functions that work or don't work. And so those types of things are always, important to understand ahead of time. Like you never want to be doing that on the ground as best as you can, right? And for anybody that's on the corporate side or law firm side here, push in and ask somebody from your litigation service provider network. I'm sure you'll get like a webinar or a presentation just to get you guys updated on what their technology does and those types of things. But I'm a big proponent of bringing in a consultant as soon as you can, right? Just because you may have the pulse on everything. I think it's always good to have at least a differing opinion, or at least a second opinion on what they would suggest. And then it also gives me the option to like, they may have a much more efficient workflow, or they've done this before, and those types of things. And I can then be a sponge to learn from them. So either way, for me, it's a win-win. I don't feel like they're stepping on my toes. I feel like it's a learning opportunity for me. And then I can, hopefully be that consultant or lead up to being that consultant in the future.
So my latest CLE is called It Depends, which when I first broke into the business, and the older people, I'd ask questions about how things work, and they said, well, it depends. And I'm like, that's a terrible answer. Like, don't tell people it depends. Then I figured out it's like the greatest answer ever, and it's also true. Because when you're now given some of the new data sources, data types, when we're going to social media, when we're trying to crawl websites, when we're using APIs, and I see Alex shaking his head because he knows this one. Like one day the API works and the next day it doesn't. Like, so you may go in there thinking I'm using XYZ product software. It's going to kill it. It's always killed it in the past. And then you find out it's been disabled. Or I spoke at a deal the other day, and one of the attorneys from Google was sitting there, and I'm like, Google sometimes governs the amount of speed the data and I was like, looked out and like, whoops, my bad. Like, probably shouldn't critique you from 10 feet away. But, sometimes those are true things. We run into the realities of data, the throughput, how fast you get access to it, what's connected to it, what it allows. We haven't even talked about modern attachments. And the problem is everyone likes to deal with these issues after the fact. And so you get, the bad dog deal where the client or the attorney may call and be like, hey, you didn't get this. And I'm like, well, you didn't tell us that, we didn't have permissions to the repository up front. Like, these are things you have to scope out up front, because every day may be a new frontier in terms of access to information, permissions to download information, and the speed by which you can do it.
I would say, oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to add on to that. Things are, look, it's no secret, right? Every day, things are rapidly changing in this world. It's no different for our industry. And so, to your point, Steve, about modern attachments and, Microsoft information protection, right, for encryption. And just like there's just so many considerations and decision points that you have to think about when you're in that chair and you're, debating proportionality or what data sources and which custodians. And, Matt really brought up a good point. It's having that consultative arm available. You might have the best technology in the world, but no software is perfect. And Steve, you bring up a good point about these connectors. We're in such a interconnected world now that, you know, having direct access to these data sources in most cases is just impossible. And so being again, that proactive component I mentioned earlier, right? Having different options, right? To maybe have different types of APIs or just the closest possible way you can to the data source definitely is of course the best. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So with the question being, you know, there's so many software options out there. How do you navigate to find, you know, what should we do? The simple recommendation could be go to conferences when you can, spend time educating yourself out there. Take those calls sometimes from the salespeople who are trying to sell you their software, right? Do 15-minute demos maybe versus a full hour just to do some exploratory. But really right now with this proliferation of data types and volumes and everything, if your solutions provider, services provider is offering you one path, and that may be a document review, you're probably needing to expand out your network, right? Call companies like Purpose, who does the investments into many different technology platforms so they can fit the solution. Those are probably just some very simple ways to navigate that process. Again, there are many out there, but the type of law you're practicing, the types of cases you're getting, look at those and find technology that is catered to those types of law.
Yeah, great shout out, Rick. I was gonna dog all three of you because I'm the only one who doesn't have like a stake in a product or a service or a software. But the reason I say that is we use all those. We've used ESIA, we've used Mode 1, we use Reveal. And here's what I'd say about that. It's like changing a tire. Like I have three daughters, so like everyone needs to know how to change a tire. I know it sounds crazy now. They got the flat ride things you can use, but everyone needs to know how to do that. Same way you need to know how to bake a cake or whatever it is. And until you do those things, like you can talk about it, you can take the phone call from the salesman for 15 minutes. I would tell you to go a step further and try a project. Because when you do a test project or you do a beta or you use it, it doesn't have to be for a $10 million first time you've ever touched the product, but use the product, provide the feedback to the individuals behind that product, to their development teams, tell them what's great about it, tell them what's not great about it, and they walk away and they're like, let's make it better. Okay, here's what we're gonna, I mean, Matt will talk about this a little bit, maybe not, but you know, when they first introduced their product, they were really down the road far with iOS, but not as much with Android, right? So they were very thoughtful about, let's tackle what we do great first and let's perfect what we don't do great. And I think all of us need to kind of immerse ourselves, like Rick said, into the products and the solutions that are out there. And don't just pay homage to them, but actually try them out and see where the long suits are or any shortcomings.
And just note too, one last quick is whether your Purpose, your Cloud9, Reveal, Mode 1, we are all figuring out these problems together. And so look at your providers and your software providers as partners in this. The cases that I've mentioned earlier was very much, we're all working together to solve this problem. It's not just assigning out and just doing a similar, the same thing over and over. There's better ways to approach that.
I love that thought process. And of course, from a marketing standpoint, I have to thank you, Rick, for the plug. And I've stolen Steve's "it depends" concept for a lot of our marketing content because it's just so true. But I'm still thinking about this guy who, you know, threw his phone in the pool. So with obvious privacy concerns on the rise, how do you ensure the ethical collection and analysis of data without compromising the investigation's integrity? Rick, can you start us off here?
Sure. Yeah, this is foremost on almost every call, and I'm sure everyone on this, you know, it's the you're going to take my phone, and I don't want you to because I've got family stuff on there, I've got personal things. So there's really big considerations, especially BYOD or cases I've been involved in that are high profile, that is they're grabbing their company phone and their personal phone, right? So the considerations around the custodian's privacy is really important. And the good thing is technology has caught up to that as well. So you can do a targeted collection. I don't fully recommend that in all cases, but you can also do a full collection and only publish to review those specific conversations for those. We had a case where the custodian did not want any personal stuff to get out. So per court order, we only want conversations between the people that are associated with the company. So an air gap computer was purchased, the data was collected, and then that laptop was thrown in a fire pit to make sure that nothing was ever seen, right? So that's a bit extreme, but the privacy considerations are real. And so the good thing is, again, technology has caught up to that part.
Is that easy to explain to custodians when they have that concern, to say that technology has kind of caught up?
Yeah, so only in 100% of the cases I've ever dealt with is privacy an issue. Like literally, I get dragged into more phone calls. They're like, the custodian doesn't want you to have access to their kids' pictures or to their financial information. And you know what? I get it. I totally get it. Married, got 3 daughters. I don't want any of their personal information out in the marketplace. I don't want people looking at any communications that aren't relevant, or substantive to a matter. And that's where the technologies and the software is great. And Rick's exactly right. You can take the entire apple and only promote a portion of it, right, upstream, and leave the rest in the black box and not do it. Or you can use a technology that is more nimble maybe and go in and only get targeted information. So it's out there and available, but privacy is a very real thing. And when I tell people that very thing, that I do care about it and it impacts my family, and all of a sudden they kind of bring it down a notch. You're like, okay, well, you do care a little bit. And there are things out there that will address my concerns. And, air gapping is a very legitimate thing, not touching the internet. Our forensic department doesn't have anything that touches our business development network. They're 2 totally separate locations. And you've got to be aware, because anyone that wants to pretend like ransomware and hacking isn't real is a fool. They're very real things, and people are utilizing, whether it's the Internet of Other Things and access to cameras, or whether it's breaking into home Wi-Fi. That's all real stuff that we deal with. And it may not be mainstream e-discovery, but it heightens all of our collective fears about privacy and Big Brother that are out there.
Yeah, I would just sort of take it one step even further than that. From the sort of software perspective, you've got e-discovery tools, legal hold tools that integrate tightly into things like Active Directory or HR tools like Workday. And you don't necessarily think about the concerns there, but also security concerns from that perspective, right? You now have another technology that's integrating at that enterprise level, capturing very real employee data. And if you're not careful about what you're synchronizing in yet another data location, again, other different ways for compromise for an organization and risk, right? So again, just a different perspective on that, but some other things for organizations to think about there.
Mm-hmm.
But as we're talking about advancements in technology, how do the advancements in AI and machine learning play a role in shaping the future of digital investigations? Alex, can you run with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to the comment I had made earlier about AI, look, AI is certainly not going to go away. We've definitely seen lots of advancements, especially in the last year alone with generative AI. But there's definitely a right way and wrong way to approach it. From the perspective of having, especially for software organizations that are going to be leveraging this type of technology, taking the right measures, the right steps, having the right people that software companies employ to really create and develop AI that's going to be used in a proper manner, right? Why does that matter? Because we're going to have, hundreds, thousands, millions of people potentially around the world using this type of software for investigative use cases. As we start seeing this type of adoption grow, going back to some of the challenges we talked about, AI is going to be critical to help slice and dice, navigate these different larger investigations, right? Identify and classify documents for you, help you get to, finding the needle in the haystack much faster, much more effective, and ultimately just collapsing that overall timeline that, historically with organizations that have large backlogs, it could take weeks, months, years sometimes to cut through them. So with that type of AI technology, I think we're going to see rapidly transformative software usage, but as well as how partners and organizations like Purpose, right, can extend those types of things out in the future.
Yeah, and I think that, the thing with AI, which is a really fancy word for software, but basically what it does is help you get to the finish line faster, right? Get to the goal line faster. That's the critical thing. I think Alex's point on that's the real kind of crux of it, is that if you can use it to look at a subset of data and not have to deal with the proliferation that we talked about earlier of data growth, that's great. You also have to bear in mind the other head of the other side of the coin is hallucinations, right? Some of the false decision making that occurs with artificial intelligence, because it's really machine learning from humans. So it's going to do the best job it can do the way it was taught. It's not a panacea. It's not an end all. And so, yes, to look at a smaller corpus of data with human eyes to make decisions, love it. To make legal decisions, don't love it yet.
Sure.
And so I think there's a big, the jury's out. I think there's a lot more. And I think there'll be a lot of people run into the game to play it, probably in part for profit motivation. So I just think we need to have, clear eyes, open hearts, right? We need to be well aware of what's in front of us and be judicious in our underwriting of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it as just a critical piece of tech that we need, because like we were talking about earlier, data is everywhere, coming from so many sources, and the new sources could come tomorrow, right? And so like if you took this large scale corporate enterprise, let's go as big as you can get, right? Like take any hedge fund or bank that got a fine last year from DOJ, right? Like if you have 100,000 employees, how are you collecting, reviewing, assessing, FINRA regulations or things that you have to do with the SEC on communications on phones or Slack or whatever? To throw human time and money at it is never going to work, right? And so really finding a way to use AI and machine learning to build, those types of analysis models to quickly chew through that data is just going to be key. There's no other way to do it.
I've seen technology out there that does some pretty neat things with GAI within your corpus of data, right? So think discovery, lots of emails and text messages and all that could be all a part of it, right? But what they're doing is saying, oh, okay, hey, I want the conversation between Matt and Rick. What are they talking about, right? I just want a quick blip of that. So that's a neat little application of just getting an understanding of context around or the types of conversations individuals are having, and maybe having. And then the other part too, you might find that they're happy one day, and then sort of the next they're on this whole other rampage, right? I think GAI can help surface a lot of those types of sentiment analysis and other types of things there. The other one that I've seen is more of an enhancement of the traditional technology assisted review, right? It's a new way to start helping categorize and organize that data better. So I think there's still a big TBD, but some of the initial GAI usage in e-discovery technologies has surfaced some pretty interesting ways to understand data.
So definitely something for us to keep our eye on.
Just a little bit.
Well, everyone's talking about it. I've just got one last question, and it's because I love a good story time. So could each of you share an instance from a recent case that exemplifies how technology is revolutionizing the digital investigation landscape? And Steve, will you start story time for us here?
Yes, and I hope this person or this team doesn't review or see this presentation. But we ran into a matter where we were brought in to do a collection. Actually, that's not true. We were brought in to help audit a collection, a self-collection that had been done. And what they found was when they unwrapped all the data, they couldn't find any of the attachments. Well, all of us know where this is going, right? They didn't have the right subscription level. I'm not even going to name the product to be as amorphous as possible here, or the company, but they didn't have the right permissions, they didn't have the right technology, and they didn't have the right game plan. So they just failed only on every front going into the process. And so they were like, we need to go get all of these document links that exist, knowing full well, and Alex can feel this, I'm sure, they're all behind either a firewall, they're protected, we don't have the permissions for them, or maybe they're even dynamic or transient URLs that point to a new location now, or a different source of content, or something that's been edited or changed over time. So this comes back to the age-old story about, you've got to decide up front. Like when they throw you the 5 gigs of data and say, let's review this, I always say, can you tell me what the case is about? Like, just give me the 30,000 foot about what are you up against? That's the other thing that drives me crazy with business development people is when they, and I'm one of them, is when they just grab data and I'm like, what's the case about? And they're like, don't know, but I got 100 gigs or a terabyte. And it's like, well, that's fascinating, but what is it about and what are they trying to achieve? Because sometimes when you get in there and you drill down, you're like, oh, don't do that. Like, for God's sake, don't go collect all these 400 people. I think we can isolate what's important here with, stratify 1 or 2 people, do the triaging, just like you do in the medical field, figure out what you need to really look at, and you may find it's a modicum of what you thought it was going to be.
Similar case, actually. We had one where they said, hey, we have all this Slack data. Can you just load it all up into Cloud9 Analyst and let's just do the review? We said, sure, we love that, right? We love that's great. We make a lot of money, but we said, look, there's 80 million messages here. We find that there's the cat meme channel, there's the hot pepper, discussion thread. And so we said, look, really, who do you care about? What people and what channels? And so identifying people and channels went from 80 million to less than 1 million. 40 attorneys scoped over 3 months, turned into 4, doing it in 3 weeks. And so there's great value in pausing for a moment and saying, what do we really need here? And that's what we did, and helped solve some pretty big challenges there.
Yeah, I'll add, and this is fairly recent, organization who, had previously used some, well-known industry tools in-house for processing and reviewing things for, HR related matters, internal investigations, that type of thing. When they started leveraging things like dashboards and we talked a little bit about AI earlier, but things like sentiment analysis and emotional intelligence and these types of things, it really began to, that was kind of like the aha moment for them, is like, wow, it literally takes all the manual days, weeks worth of work that you would maybe take to like find the needle in the haystack and really sort of boil that down into, 5 minutes and a couple clicks, right? And so to me, that was an extremely powerful reaction, especially when you're kind of like on the phone live with the person, when they first log in and then they've loaded some data into the tool.
Mine's nothing crazy, but we recently had, there was a client who, during their deposition, they had been operating under the assumption they'd had an iOS Apple phone the whole time. And during the deposition, it came out they also have an Android device, and they didn't disclose that. And literally the judge gave them till 8 a.m. the next morning to do these things. And he's in Rhode Island. And so being able to have better technology without like those, the need for cords and all that stuff was just, it was so easy for us to get that. I mean, he's still in trouble, but it was so easy to get that data set and get it reviewed and produced that night to the judge the next morning, right? And so there are things like that also, just being able to be responsive, be just adjust for whatever's coming your way is great.
That guy friends with the pool phone guy?
Yeah, I know. He's the blender phone guy.
All right, well, that concludes all of my questions for this session. As we wrap up today's webinar, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you guys. I mean, it's been a truly insightful conversation with just a wealth of knowledge. Before saying goodbye, I'd like to pass the mic back to each of you So you can share the best way for our attendees to follow your work or to reach out for further discussion. Alex, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on best way to contact me would be LinkedIn. Long last name, so if you just sort of copy and paste out of this, that'd be great. Otherwise, you can find us at revealdata.com.
Thank you, Alex. And Rick?
Yep, same for me. LinkedIn would be great, or rclark@cloud9.com. But LinkedIn, there are a lot of Rick Clarks out there, but I think if I've got a pretty good sized network that you should be able to find me pretty quickly in the legal space. But just do a search for Rick Clark Cloud9, and would love to chat with you and explore this more.
Cool. For Mode 1, yeah, LinkedIn works for me as well. You guys can go to mode1.io if you want. Check out the tech, book a demo. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, you won't find me on Facebook, but you can find me on LinkedIn and purposelegal.io. It's Steve D at purposelegal.io. Just want to thank Savannah for doing this, and it's always good to be with friends and colleagues that know what they're talking about. So appreciate you guys as well.
Yeah, thanks, Savannah. This was great.
Yeah, thank you, Savannah.
Thank you, guys. And of course, thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Remember, we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording and a recap blog of the program. And I'll also include all of the speakers' contact information in that email. So should you wish to revisit any part of this session or dive deeper into the topics discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, keep exploring and pushing the boundaries of digital investigations. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye.